Back to order. Welcome back. I hope you had a good lunch break. Our first presentation of the afternoon is from Quest Canada, and we have Mr. Oldfield. He's the Senior Lead of Projects and Advisory Services. So Mr. Oldfield, the process that we use, you have 20 minutes to make your presentation, followed by your 20 minutes. We will have 40 minutes of questions coming from each party. Okay? Perfect. The floor is now yours.
Thanks very much, Patrick. I'm assuming you're on my first slide, so could you advance that to the About Quest slide? It's a pleasure to be invited to present today. As was mentioned, I'm the Senior Lead for Projects and Advisory Services with Quest Canada. I'm based here in Fredericton, New Brunswick, but we are a national team and a national not-for-profit that supports communities across Canada in their journey of becoming smart energy communities and on their pathway to become net zero. We've been doing this since 2007, facilitating connections, empowering community champions, and even influencing decision makers to implement efficient and integrated energy systems that best meet community needs and maximize local opportunities. I'd like to note that we work with many communities in New Brunswick to help them develop and implement community energy plans. For example, 15 New Brunswick municipalities are part of our current Smart Energy Community Accelerator program. 25 are part of our New Brunswick Municipal Working Group, and we provide support to the municipal associations and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partners for Climate Protection program, which includes over 55 members in New Brunswick. Next slide, please. So evidently, communities are important to our work, and we feel that they're also very important to the transition to net zero. Communities are responsible for over 50% of our energy and emissions in Atlantic Canada, and there are strategies and actions that they can deploy to both reduce energy use and emissions at the same time as improving their economic position. And these will help the province meet its climate objectives, but challenges do remain, and they will need to be enabled through the right combination of policies, programs, incentives, and regulations. As you probably know, a lot of energy is lost to inefficiencies, for example, through power generation, transmission, distribution, and end use. So by reducing the amount we require at the local level, we subsequently reduce the emissions and the pressure to continue building large generation and transmission infrastructure. In electricity alone, which is about 30% of New Brunswick energy use, the energy efficiency potential has been estimated by NB Power to be equivalent to more than 600 megawatts. However, a broader and more aggressive suite of energy efficiency and clean energy programs can reduce the reliance on fossil fuel electricity generation and subsequently reduce energy losses, future energy costs. In addition, most of the places we call home were built without energy top of mind, so we end up using a lot, wasting a lot, and we're paying the consequences. So it is estimated that Canadians on average spend between $2,000 and $4,000 on energy per year. And so a community of up to 20,000 people might spend up to $80 million on energy per year as a whole. And because most of that energy is not produced locally, these dollars, up to 80% for many communities, leave the community to upstream producers and transmitters. Herein is an opportunity to keep energy dollars local while reducing emissions. Next slide, please. To meet net zero by 2050, a transition is taking place. While the primary means of delivering energy is not changing, there is an opportunity to integrate new sources of energy, energy efficiency, and services into conventional energy delivery infrastructure. Many of those solutions are technology, such as efficient appliances, wind or solar power, energy storage, and electric vehicles. These are implemented locally in our communities where planning and building decisions are made day to day. The planning decisions that we thus make today will affect the building and technology choices that are made tomorrow, and the long-term benefits that we all enjoy, and the long-term impacts, the costs of our energy system. We are fortunately seeing a lot of ground-up momentum, both here in New Brunswick and across Canada. Today, over 400 communities across Canada, 55 of which are in New Brunswick, representing half the Canadian population, are engaged in some form of community energy planning and taking the lead to think differently about the way energy is planned for and managed at the community scale. So community energy plans are not just an important tool to reduce emissions locally, they are helping to meet provincial and federal climate targets. We call these communities smart energy communities, and some of them, including in New Brunswick, are now setting targets to achieve net zero by 2050 or sooner. Next slide, please. Community energy plans are as much about reducing emissions as they are about keeping energy dollars local and driving economic development. So as an example, we do a lot of work with communities to understand the potential full economic impact of their community energy plans. To take the example of the town of Quispamsis, their community energy plan includes reduction targets of approximately 10,750 tons of CO2 equivalent, or 8% across the community by 2025, a further 16% by 2035. As per the economic impact assessment work that we conducted, the full implementation of the proposed energy saving measures in Quispamsis and result, once it's fully implemented, in over 10 million in annual savings for that community, a carbon saving, assuming $50 a ton, of up to 1.35 million, and divert up to 280 million over 25 years into the local economy at today's prices, once fully implemented. So investment in local energy initiatives allows more dollars to be spent in the local economy and provides opportunities for local employment. The implementation of these plans can also aid in post-COVID-19 economic recovery by supporting lower energy costs, a cleaner environment, new business opportunities, and more. The size of markets for the products and services that serve this transitioning energy economy has significantly grown in the last 20 years. It is estimated at over $70 billion as an industry in Canada, but we are talking about many more billions globally. The channels to new energy markets are being driven to a large degree by local governments who have an interest and purview over their local economies and are largely motivated by the positive economic impacts that come from implementing community energy plans. Next slide, please. Generally speaking, these communities will join the FCM Partners for Climate Protection program. It is the only national program that exists to support municipal action on emission reductions. Here is a snapshot of the members in New Brunswick and part of the Maritimes. As you can see, 55 members have been quite active, with many already at milestone 3, having developed a greenhouse gas inventory, set targets, and developed a plan with stakeholder engagement. This presents numerous opportunities for businesses, as well as to improve energy efficiency, incorporated distributed energy resources, transportation improvements, and more. A dozen or so communities have already achieved their targets, so milestone 5, and are now looking at deeper emission reduction targets and renewing their plans. These communities did not get there alone. Many were supported via FCM, the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund, the municipal associations, not-for-profits, and consulting firms located across New Brunswick. That support needs to continue for communities to be successful at implementing their plans and achieving targeted reductions. Many of these municipalities still face challenges, which I will outline soon, and which could be solved through the right combination of provincial goals, policies, and actions. I will conclude with those later. It should be noted that as a municipal result of the municipal reform process, several communities with community energy plans will be amalgamated, which will require revisions to their baseline greenhouse gas inventories, reduction targets, and plans. As the situation evolves, it may be useful to support the municipalities or the municipal associations to undertake this work, and to further streamline and reduce duplication of efforts, develop a centralized database or a web portal like in British Columbia to illustrate community greenhouse gas emissions and reduction targets, and to provide a standard way for data collection and reporting. This would also give the province a clearer picture of the full potential of community energy plans to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and contribute to economic growth. Next slide, please. A little shout out to one of our successful programs before I get into the recommendations. Quest continues to support New Brunswick communities through the Smart Energy Communities Accelerator pilot program. Over 15 municipalities are involved in this program. It aims to build capacity and support these communities in the various stages of developing and implementing their community energy plans. Next slide, please. It involves providing a number of resources, services, and tools. For example, benchmarking their strengths and weaknesses across 10 best practices, energy mapping workshops to identify opportunities for improvement, the development of community energy planning workshops, as well as implementation workshops, and furthermore, economic impact assessments, renewable energy mapping assessments, course for planning professionals, and more. Next slide. So that hopefully was enough of a context. I'd like now to focus on the challenges and recommendations as part of the New Brunswick Climate Change Plan renewal. New Brunswick is on track with its current targets, but deeper emissions reductions will be required to meet net zero by 2050 or sooner. This includes meeting federal requirements for phasing out coal by 2030, as well as meeting new demands created through the electrification of transport, industry, and buildings. It is important that economic investments be made in reducing energy waste and making cleaner energy choices at the local level. Transitioning to a low carbon economy is no longer just a climate issue. It is increasingly about access to export markets and being competitive in attracting new investment. Excuse me. Unleashing the full potential of smart energy communities means creating an enabling environment for municipal action. This includes increasing capacity to implement community energy plans as well as updated provincial legislation. Quest's New Brunswick PEI Municipal Working Group brings together municipal professionals to exchange knowledge and identify and address issues. With over 25 participating municipalities in bi-monthly meetings, this group has identified some high priority policy and program opportunities that would facilitate the implementation of their plans to reduce emissions and enable our municipalities to be front and center in the post-COVID economic recovery. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there's a couple of challenges, and I've tried to list them on one slide here. Evidently, municipalities often lack capacity. This includes expertise in-house as well as staff resource capacity to develop and implement those plans. There's a lack of a standard way for data collection, resulting in a duplication of efforts. There is a lack of clear multi-year or long-term funding to develop and implement community energy plans and the associated projects, as well as to build the local capacity. There's an inability or lack of explicit authority in the Local Governance Act to support efficiency financing, leaving some, if I should say, $290 million of federal funding inaccessible to municipalities. And tied with that, billing systems are run by the province. I will address those challenges in a few slides. Lack of guidance for standards for municipal land use planning and bylaws, and this would include for provisions for energy efficiency in the built environment, for clean energy, and for active transportation. So really right now we have a mosaic of policies and bylaws at the municipal level that relate to that. There's an inability to develop renewable energy projects due to a variety of factors, which I will address for a few slides down. And basically coming down to policy and regulation that will need to be updated if we want to unleash the full potential of smart energy communities. Next slide. To address the challenges of capacity, there are a few reinforcing the actions the province can take. Continuing to improve upon Action Plan 118 in your current action plan, making provisions for multi-year funding, and make sure that this funding can be confirmed and secured all at once rather than each year, and ensure that this funding can be used to develop community energy plans or net zero plans, updating land use plans, which a lot of municipalities will need to do once the amalgamations are complete, conducting studies and capital projects to reduce emissions, as well as to support the local and regional energy coordinators. And this follows through to my second bullet here, providing support for those coordinators at the municipal level or establishing regional energy coordinators that serve smaller communities in a specific geography that can help with the implementation of those plans. This could be a cost-shared model and/or hosted by regional services commissions where suitable. Establishing a program of embedded energy managers and energy technical advisors is something that we're sort of borrowing from Nova Scotia through the good example from Efficiency One. And this basically provides municipalities with access to technical expertise for specific technical studies and projects to reduce energy costs and emissions. Might be done through NB Power, for example. I mentioned earlier the establishment of a provincial database or standard process for gathering energy and consumption data at the municipal level, but I would also like to recommend that you ensure that the public has access to hourly electricity emissions associated with generation, as we do in other provinces, so we can see the impact of energy conservation and peak demand reduction in near real time. Next slide, please. In terms of efficiency financing, there's a lot to unpack. I'll try to keep it brief here. This is something that the province has looked at over a number of years and, basically learning from the results from other jurisdictions. In the action plan, the current action plan, Action 35, currently states, if viable, use the property assessed clean energy or PACE program in New Brunswick. I'd like to first of all suggest that you reframe that as enabling low-cost, long-term loans for New Brunswick home and apartment owners, obviously for efficiency. This really means developing a low-cost financing for private property owners to implement energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements, in addition to the current incentive programs. To offer low-cost loans would obviously require some form of security for the loans, and that security could come in the form of municipal liens or government guarantees. Even the Federation of Canadian Municipalities provides a $2 million security for these types of loans. The outcome should be long-term financing at low cost and no down payments focused on projects that save the building owner money. And this will remove many of the upfront barriers that homeowners have to improving efficiency. The key challenge currently for this type of program is that provincial legislation does not explicitly provide municipalities with the authority to offer low-cost secured loans to homeowners for efficiency upgrades, and the billing systems are currently run by the province. In other provinces, it's different. The opportunity is to accelerate building upgrades and electrification while also saving homeowners money. So what needs to be done? There's really two options here. One is you go the route that other provinces have and provide municipalities and the municipal utilities explicit authority to establish an efficiency financing program or work with a third party. This can be embedded in the Local Governance Act or through some other legislation. It would allow the municipalities to leverage FCM community efficiency financing. In addition, municipal associations could undertake a feasibility study with funding from FCM. And there may be a role, this is the second option, for NB Power to be a provincial delivery agent if a provincial program is desired. It is probably important for the success of this financing program that it is seen as a community-led effort, but provincial standards and back office functions could be province-wide. If it's the former, certainly some things that you might want to consider in addition are developing tools to de-risk and expand municipal lending, removing secure energy-related municipal borrowing from the calculation of municipal debt-to-service coverage ratios, working with municipalities to explore options for payment systems and the ability to check on the status of liens on a property, and enabling tax adjustments for rental and low-income housing owners who increase efficiency of their properties and pass savings to their tenants. We know very well that this is a challenge in the multi-residential and low-income housing sector in particular. Next slide. I'm going to change to land use now. May I get a time check?
You have 4 minutes and 40 seconds remaining.
Okay. Thank you very much, Patrick. Or Bill. Okay, as far as land use goes, I'll try to keep this brief. We know that some of the policies and codes in New Brunswick are slightly out of date. The green building policy, for example, was last updated in 2011. The National Energy Code for buildings has not yet been adopted. So we would recommend doing so, adopting the code and updating the green building policy. And in addition, allowing municipalities to develop and enforce their own stretch codes if they're better or more environmentally stringent than the provincial code, which is currently the 2012 building code. So you might want to allow municipalities to go beyond that if they are ready to do so. Continue to encourage community and regional land use planning practices that have provisions for energy efficiency, energy conservation, renewable energy, and active transportation. So there's some requirements that need to be put into either the Community Planning Act or as guidance through statements of provincial interest to manage or guide land use planning practices in New Brunswick with respect to energy and climate change. Next slide, renewable energy. When it comes to renewable energy, we know there's a tremendous opportunity in New Brunswick due to our heritage of natural resources. And so with this in mind, we encourage you to continue the actions in the current plan of 42 through 44, much of which is to do with increasing renewables in New Brunswick. In addition, these are addressing specific challenges that communities have to fully leverage the local opportunities for renewable resource development. So first of all, we have a net metering program with a 100 kilowatt cap. We would propose to increase the cap on net metering and allow virtual net metering to enable municipal development of renewable energy projects. This is particularly useful where a municipality has a parcel of land that is good for solar energy, say a ground mount solar farm that can supply enough electricity to offset multiple municipal facilities at multiple meter points. In addition, if some communities wish to develop solar farms for which citizens can then procure a power segment from, you will need to create a virtual net metering program that allows this. This would be a new stream. And this would require an update in legislation to allow municipalities to sell or lease panels. The other would be to make sure that net metering arrangements do not exclude third parties. For example, renewable energy cooperatives who finance, lease, own, and operate solar panels on your roof should not be disqualified from the efficiency incentives or net metering programs in New Brunswick. And finally, increasing total cap of renewable power procurement and relaunching LORES, the locally owned renewable energy for small scale systems, modified to include 3 tiers, under 3 megawatts because those are typically smaller local scale projects, over 3 to 10 megawatts and over 10 megawatts. Within each tier, you can set tariffs and power can be procured on a lowest cost basis within each tier. Next slide, please. Furthermore, for renewable energy, municipalities need to have the ability to accrue revenue from renewable energy installations. And this requires explicit authority to do so that they can capitalize new projects or further efficiency measures year over year. Similarly, municipal utilities require ownership or the ability to own renewable energy systems, use provincial transmission infrastructure, and direct revenues to their stakeholder, the municipality. This would encourage investment into grid-tied renewable energy systems in New Brunswick towards meeting our targets. You may want to also consider an innovation sandbox to provide a testing environment for new business models and technologies as part of that transition. Finally, transportation. These are fairly self-explanatory, and I'll leave you with the speaking notes as well for you to consult. But these all relate to communities, and particularly the electrification of transport within communities through supports for L2 charging stations and L3 charging stations, as well as regional transit efforts, additional incentives, and anti-idling policies. In summary, the key takeaway here is that there are challenges to local capacity and the legislative environment is behind, which is impeding progress to reduce emissions at the scale of what is achievable in the time frame needed. The key actions to address this challenge are to improve local capacity and update legislation to support things like efficiency financing, renewable integration, land use planning, and sustainable transportation. While many of these policies and measures address specific sectoral needs, I also feel there needs to be an intersectoral approach for achieving net zero. If these measures are not taken, it will lock us into suboptimal carbon pathways and contribute to the cost of achieving our emission reduction targets. Thank you very much.
Wow, that was pretty good. You finished right on the zeros. Thank you very much for that presentation. We'll now move into our question period. And vous allez commencer, Madame Landry.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Good afternoon, Mr. Oldfield. Thank you for your presentation. You did good. Quickly, I have some questions regarding your presentation on page 4. You're talking about 50 communities in New Brunswick, and then on page 8, you're talking about 15 communities. So is it 55 or 15, or I'm just wondering, what's the number?
Perfect. There are two separate things. The 55 municipalities are part of the national program, the FCM Partners for Climate Protection Program. The 15 communities are part of the New Brunswick Smart Energy Community Accelerator program. Some of them are in both, okay? So there is some duplication. I would say a good total figure would be about 60.
Okay. And are you delivering the FCM program in all those municipalities?
For the last 4 years, we have served as the regional climate advisor for FCM. So we have provided technical support to 92 members in Atlantic Canada, but a lot of the work is done locally and with the support of the municipal associations too. So we're not alone in helping them, yeah.
Okay. On page 6, your map of New Brunswick with the dots, colored dots, from 0 to the star 5. Can you explain? I might have missed that. What does the blue and the green and the yellow and the stars, what do they mean?
Sure. There are 5 milestones in the program. The yellow dots are milestone 3, which means a community is halfway. They've developed an inventory, they've developed a plan, and they've set targets. If they have a red star, they're already at milestone 5. They've finished their plan, they've reduced their emissions, now they're setting new targets. But if it's blue or green, forget the color, but I can double check. Typically, these municipalities are new in the process. They have not yet developed a plan. They're still working on developing those plans. We're working with a few of those too.
Okay, and of the 15 New Brunswick communities that are under the Smart Energy Communities Accelerator, I think you call that PACE? PACE, is that the name?
PACE is the efficiency financing option.
Okay, but that accelerator, the 15 communities, how were they chosen?
The 15 communities, so the PACE is different. In the 15 communities were chosen for the Accelerator program based on self-identified needs. So we put an announcement out through municipal associations and to our network to see if communities needed assistance, for example, building capacity, building expertise, and other services. And those communities approached us. So they self-identified, they applied, and we onboarded them into the program. Some of those communities were starting from zero. They had nothing in place yet, but they want to do something. And so we helped them through all the steps to get there. Other communities came in, they've already got a plan, but they are stalling with implementation because of these barriers, lack of capacity, lack of funding, all these other things I've mentioned today. So we're helping them through some of those challenges to move forward and measure progress.
Okay. And you're probably aware of the start of the implementation of the white paper with a lot of amalgamation, and what will be the effect on the municipalities that you're working with?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. Immediately through the amalgamation process, some municipalities that have already made commitments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and have a plan in place are now expanding to quadruple the population and a bigger territory with more assets. And so immediately what they're going to need to do is update their asset inventory and their greenhouse gas emissions inventory to get a better understanding of how greenhouse gas emissions are produced in their new territory. And they're going to have to revise the targets and the plan, because now you want to set a target that includes the wider community. You want a plan that incorporates other elements from the amalgamated territories. So that's the first impact that's going to have. And I would suggest that support needs to continue through the Environmental Trust Fund, through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and through the various policies of New Brunswick to make sure municipalities can move forward.
Okay.
The other impact will be land use
Go
planning.
ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
So no, go ahead.
Land use planning, bylaws, and regulations should also be updated so municipalities are going forward in a good design way.
Okay. In that same line of questioning, do you see that the CSR, SRC, whatever you call them, Regional Service Commission, RSC, don't you think that they could undertake the work that you're doing, or will that be transferred to them? How do you see that?
It's a good question. It is why in my slides I've provided a recommendation to support regional energy coordinators where suitable, but in some cases municipalities will want to have their own staff internally. These are like larger towns, for example, and cities. But in many cases where there are smaller communities, they can certainly get support through a regional service commission if they are provided the mandate to do that.
Okay. And do you have any community dialogue right now, or looking at some that are taking place to expand the program, to expand the services?
Yes, we are in constant engagement here in New Brunswick and nationally. We would like to create a national net zero accelerator program based on the one we're doing in New Brunswick.
And you're exclusively working with communities and municipalities?
No, in fact, we work with utilities, real estate developers, energy service and technology providers, municipal governments. Obviously, we engage at the provincial and federal level as well, because they are all stakeholders in the transition to net zero, and decisions at the community level require multiple stakeholder input.
Okay, and do you receive both public and private funding?
Yes.
Okay, in what proportion would that be from private to public?
We have a supporter network which includes governments, utilities, private sector. It's a good question that I can't answer off the top of my head. Would you mind if I followed up on that?
No, and I would just have like to have an idea of what a private funding partner would be. Who would that be? But if you don't know, it's okay.
I don't know the proportion of funding received by Quest in each of those sectors, but I can find out. I can give you examples of private, for example, a sector. This would include, as I said, energy utilities, electricity providers, natural gas providers. It also includes foundations, As far as private sector, it could include large consulting engineering firms. It includes energy service and technology providers. There's too many for me to name across the country.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But I was thinking about New Brunswick. And last, maybe not, but how is New Brunswick government supporting your efforts?
Yeah, so we work primarily through the Climate Change Secretariat of the New Brunswick Department of Environment. We correspond with them regularly to involve them in the community engagements, but we also ensure that we can help them with the goals set out in the climate change plan, and we make applications to the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund. That is the primary way in which we work with the province of New Brunswick. We've also worked or corresponded with the New Brunswick Department of Energy, you know which one, the Department of Energy, and they are a smaller department, but when it comes to enabling policies and legislation, that's where some of that action takes place. So, you know, we correspond with them more on that level. And on occasion, we'll reach out to some of the business development or export development branches of government to ensure that we are working in alignment there and that we're engaging the industry in New Brunswick.
And do you offer your services in both official languages of New Brunswick?
Yes, we do.
Okay, because I've seen in the Accelerator program, mainly there are municipalities from the south and the southwestern region of the province, and I was wondering if you were offering as well services or these programs in the north.
Oui, on le fait. Moi, je suis parfaitement bilingue, mais aussi nos services sont tous dans les deux langues. On peut le faire en anglais ou en français.
Parfait. Merci, c'est mes questions. Merci beaucoup.
Merci.
Sorry, Mr. Kuhn. I was on mute that time. The floor is now yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that, and good afternoon, Mr. Oldfield. Thank you for your recommendations, which are thorough and certainly designed to be effective. I recognize many of them as examples of, or you can think of examples where some version of them have been applied somewhere else in the world, Canada, U.S., elsewhere. So we know that they are effective. Or in most cases not doing going first. I'm one of the two remaining members of the original Select Committee on Climate Change. Jules Lepage, representing Restigouche, is the other, who are still sitting in the legislature. And we were very proud of the Select Committee report that all of us were from the three parties involved at the time. It's interesting looking back. One of the things we did was recommended was that the government provide flood hazard mapping publicly in the form of a web-based atlas kind of system, and that was just released last week. So the recommendations were made 5 years and 3 months ago, but they have come to pass. What hasn't come to pass, though, as I look at it, is we also made a recommendation that the National Energy Code and the National Building Code be adopted in the year they're released, and that training be carried out to make the implementation smooth in New Brunswick. That hasn't occurred, so I was pleased to see your recommendation on adopting the National Energy Code for buildings, because as we've been told, we're operating on essentially 2010 measures for new construction, and that's just perpetuating a lot of energy waste. So what I wanted to ask you about that was, do you have any sense from your work at the municipal level, where most of the building inspectors are and so on, why it's taking so long in New Brunswick compared to other provinces to actually implement the latest National Building Code and related energy code that is designed to ensure that energy waste is stamped out and carbon footprints are reduced?
Thank you, David. It's a good question. Probably a combination of things at play here. One, I get going back to capacity, and in terms of building bylaw enforcement, bylaw enforcement in general in New Brunswick. So that's one aspect. The other would be the training part. Requires that the province invest in those opportunities or incentivizes that through the education system, provides professional development opportunities, and even through the Association for Building Professionals. I forget the exact name. So I think it's a bit of a chicken and egg thing. Yes, you want the professionals to be ready to undertake the necessary compliance efforts, but you also need the policy that drives that. And I think without that policy, without updating or at least having a timeline for the adoption of those codes, preferably when they are released federally, then that just sort of leaves it in a bit of a disarray. So I think you need to start setting a timeline for the adoption of those updated codes, and then look at working with the required building professionals and associations to ensure that training can take place in the time frame allotted, rather than waiting to set that date at a later date.
Thanks for that. Just quickly, you mentioned in passing that municipalities cannot get at $290 million, I think you said, through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Can you just explain that? It caught my attention a little more so we understand what the problem is.
As you know, FCM's Green Municipal Fund provides funding for green infrastructure projects across Canada, and one of the new tranches of funding that they released about a year ago is called Community Efficiency Financing Program. It's actually up to $350 million in that particular program to support long-term low-cost efficiency financing programs across Canada. In the first round, they accepted applications for ready-to-go projects as well as applications for studies. It's now an open call for proposals. Literally any municipality or municipal association, and in partnership with their utilities, can apply to this funding. And to give you an example of that, Pace Atlantic, which operates in Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island, which ironically shares a very similar legislative environment with respect to this topic, to us, they've secured 24 million, I think it was over 24 million from the FCM Community Efficiency Financing Program. And they've already had a great success in allocating some of those loans to efficiency retrofits in Charlottetown, Stratford, and Oldfield, Nova Scotia. So something very similar could be achieved here, and all it requires is that authority to allow for efficiency financing programs to be set up, so that a municipality may make an application to FCM and receive those grants.
That requires some kind of legislative change?
Again, there can be two ways to go about this. There's opening up the Local Governance Act and ensuring that authority is explicitly in there, such as it is in Nova Scotia. There would also be a requirement to look at the preferred way for a billing system to be arranged, because of course it's collected through property tax installments to pay back those loans. So if it's collected provincially, how do you redisperse that to the municipalities where those efficiency retrofits take place? And the municipalities need to be able to check on the liens. So there's one way is to update the act. Another way is to introduce a separate piece of legislation that deals specifically with this and provides maybe different options for municipalities, municipal utilities, third parties, and even provincial, let's say the Crown Corp, New Brunswick Power, to undertake a provincial level program. In fact, what may work best for New Brunswick is a bit of both. You have a provincial program that aligns the low-cost loans with the efficiency incentives and are administered provincially through a Crown corporation like NB Power. And you have the ability for New Brunswick municipalities and their local utilities to implement similar types of efficiency, or at least a portal for that efficiency financing locally.
So you did speak a lot about the importance of financing, accessibility to financing for energy efficiency improvements and adoption of renewable energy technologies. Can you expand a little bit on why that is? Why did you devote the time you did to speak on financing?
I think because we've known that this is an opportunity. First of all, it's a measure that has worked successfully in at least 4 other provinces in Canada and also globally. There are many other examples of this, so we're not reinventing the wheel. This is something that we know works. But of course, the legislative environment is different in each of these jurisdictions. So we had to take our time to look at what those particular challenges were. And we did that through consultation with the province, with the municipal working group that we have. We also talked to other jurisdictions about what works and how it works. So we came up with a set of ideas around how to make it work in New Brunswick. And then more recently, there was the community efficiency financing program that was launched, as I mentioned, but was no municipality in New Brunswick accessed those fundings for the reasons I've mentioned. And PACE Atlantic was set up and shows us that in a similar legislative environment in PEI, which also doesn't have the explicit sort of details in their legislation, they are able to do it, and they found a way to do it. So we made a submission to the municipal reform process that outlines that in a lot of detail. But unfortunately, through that reform process, those sort of things got left on the back burner, with the focus being on, of course, on the amalgamations.
Thanks for that. You with respect to renewables, said there's a need to update the Electricity Act in order to drive more renewable energy development. Could you provide a little more detail on the rationale for that?
Certainly. At the moment, municipalities who may wish to integrate local renewable energy systems, whether it's at a site level or at a community scale, are unable to do so viably due to the fact that there isn't the right policy in place. Under the Electricity Act right now, installations are limited to 100 kilowatts. The embedded generation has reached its cap, so NB Power, under current regulation, it's got no interest in procuring more domestically sourced renewables. However, of course, with the closure, not the closure, but the considerations around Beldoon, the province is going to have to look at sourcing a supply of electricity from clean sources that could be a combination of domestically procured renewables, as well as imported hydro, as well as other options that are on the table. So I think that there's a real opportunity here for slight updates to the Electricity Act, including improving the net metering cap, so larger community scale solar installations can be installed to create a virtual net metering program that allows citizens to purchase power segments or lease panels on their and gain the credits against their electricity bills. There's the need for increasing the embedded generation cap. Otherwise, what reason does NB Power have to procure domestically sourced renewable energy? And along with that, the previous LORIS program was, I would say, semi-successful. The policy had perhaps the right intentions, but in essence, because it wasn't designed as effectively as it could have, it favored the lowest cost, which was large-scale 20 megawatt wind farms, not all of which went forward. And so we have a LORIS program that was designed to enable these small-scale, locally owned renewable energy systems, but which excluded, for the most part, many of those smaller scale renewable energy systems. And that's why we propose to not only increase the cap on embedded gen, but provide a new LORIS program that's redesigned with 3 tiers. The 3 tiers will allow for that diversification at the local scale and still achieve the sort of renewable targets that the province has.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Austin, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Oldfield, for presenting today. Can everybody hear me okay?
Perfect.
Okay, perfect. I guess a couple things I just wanted to touch on. In your presentation, you talk about a innovation sandbox, and I'm just wondering if you can kind of drill down a little bit on that and what that means and what it may entail.
Thank you, Chris, for that question. I'd love to. Just a second. I want to make sure I'm consulting my notes on this one. Okay, so for the last couple of years, Quest has been running an Innovation Sandboxes initiative. And the first part of this was to look at or conduct international research comparing innovation or regulatory sandboxes implemented or being developed in 9 jurisdictions worldwide. And this resulted in a report of concepts of how sandboxes can operate and what they are and how they are designed. The second report that we produced is about bridging the gaps in energy of innovation in Canada. It reviews the current state of innovation policies and programs in Canada's energy sector and examines the potential role that these sandboxes can play to overcome non-technological barriers and scale up low-carbon innovation in Canada's energy sector. The first jurisdiction that we actually worked with to develop an innovation sandbox framework is Ontario. So we've produced a third report that focuses on the role of these sandboxes in getting to net zero. It's a continuation of our research. In addition to Ontario, we wish to work with 3 provinces and territorial jurisdictions at the engagement stage of our work. So we work with multiple stakeholders to raise concerns, address barriers, and develop solutions to renew the sandbox or the regulatory framework in New Brunswick in this case. And so that allows us to look at, what are the key challenges from a regulatory and policy perspective, from a non-technical perspective, from a business model perspective, from a community planning perspective. How do these all relate, and how can we kind of bring down some of those barriers, build bridges, as it were?
Great, thank you for that. Yeah, it kind of piqued my interest in interesting terminology, which I guess that's the goal, is to get some interest in some of these concepts. So the work that was done in Ontario, is that just started? Is that kind of halfway through or through the process? Where is that, and how is that unfolding?
That is already well underway, if not almost complete. I believe I can get my colleagues to share some more details with you on that.
Yeah, that'd be great. And I'm sure, the logistics in Ontario would be significantly different than New Brunswick, and smaller province and more spread out geographically, but maybe the concepts would be similar.
Exactly. The way to the road to an innovation sandbox is similar. In other words, how do we identify and address some of the challenges in creating a sandbox in the first place? We're not actually creating the sandbox. We're creating the conditions and the framework for that sandbox to take place. That would be then the next act of the government. We also have met with the New Brunswick Energy and Utilities Board in a couple of years now, prior to COVID, and they did express some interest in this, but it was a little too early to act on it.
Gotcha. The other thing I'd like to talk about is part of your presentation, talk about sustainable transportation. And, when I think of, a city like Toronto, transportation, clearly already there. And what I assume you're talking about public transportation, should clarify that. Public transportation or some other form of transportation?
Sustainable transportation would encompass public transit, active transport, transportation demand management, and a few other things.
Okay. Because I was just, I guess in my mind, I was thinking public transportation in New Brunswick, and I know I can even speak for my community that I live in, Minto. There used to be a bus line that would go from Minto into Fredericton that's not available anymore. And I'm just wondering, looking at New Brunswick and specific to public transportation, what are the benefits that you're aware of in terms of, helping get to net zero or helping to reduce carbon with public transportation as opposed to other means, looking at New Brunswick?
Well, I think we need to understand that transportation is roughly a third of New Brunswick emissions. I don't quote me on that. But yes, it's one of the larger portions of our greenhouse gas emissions. So any action there to reduce single occupancy vehicles and to encourage people to take transit or be active in transportation is very much needed in the province of New Brunswick. In addition to that, we're seeing regulations around the emissions from vehicles rather. So in 2035, where we expect most things to be electrified or through some other form of energy. Transit in itself plays a role not just in terms of greenhouse gas emission reductions, but it provides options for mobility, especially for those without vehicles or who are challenged that way. So it provides a social benefit to the community. And so those are important factors to consider as well as the economic one. But transit systems are notoriously hard to keep afloat with transit rates vis-a-vis the convenience of the car and the current parking charges that exist within communities. And so it's a bit of a chicken and egg there too, where a community needs to create the conditions for people to be disincentivized to use their personal vehicles, for example, parking charges, and also making sure that communities are more pedestrian friendly and more active transportation friendly. This will encourage some folks to use transit more frequently. Other incentives could be used there. Now, there are differences across the province. We have transit in Fredericton, St. John, and Moncton. It has been tried in Bathurst. We lost some of the provincial sort of intercity bus routes that used to exist. I know some regions in the north are also looking at regional, like in the Peninsula Acadienne, they're looking at some type of transit system. it does make sense to look at some of those local systems, but it requires investment provincially and federally.
Yeah, no question. And I think New Brunswick would have, maybe not, but I'm thinking a little more of a challenge because it's really the smaller cities and it's the rural areas trying to get to these cities for services and that sort of thing. And yeah, the challenge I could certainly see being somewhat of a barrier and a problem to provincial transit, maybe on a local level, not so much. But anyway, I appreciate that answer and that discussion. Mr. Chair, I don't think I have any more questions for Mr. Oldfield, and I just want to say thank you again for presenting here today and appreciate your input.
Thank you, Chris. Can't hear you.
We can't hear you, Mr. Chair.
Time for one more question.
You have an office in Fredericton.
Yes, I do. Yes. It's a home office. We are spread across the country. Yeah.
Okay.
So, Mr. Oldfield, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. I think while we're waiting for the chair, he was probably just lining up to introduce me to ask some questions. So, Mr. Chair, if you're probably aware by now your volume isn't working. But Mr. Oldfield, I'd like to thank you today for coming in and sharing this information. There's certainly a lot to absorb, and it's been quite enlightening for myself. So I thank you for that information. One thing I did note, and I believe you had referenced Quispamsis early on in your presentation, and I've come to see that Quispamsis is doing some things down there that has them recognized as a national energy planning leader. And I think, to quote yourself, recognized as a role model for not just the province, but the country as a whole. So I'm just wondering if you can kind of elaborate a little bit on how your work went with the town of Quispamsis, and what learnings can you share with this committee?
Fantastic. You know, I've been working in this field for just over 20 years in New Brunswick, and town of Quispamsis was one of the first communities that I was working with and through various different initiatives over the years. They had made a very early commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as part of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Partner for Climate Protection Program. It's a bit of a mouthful. So already one of the first things I can share as a lesson learned is that you need the champion at the council level and staff support for a community to be serious about making that commitment and to take it forward. So number one, you need to identify those champions. And we do a lot of that work working with municipalities to make sure that there's a member of council that's engaged and that there's a senior management person, usually a chief administrative officer in the community that can sort of take charge or the lead on it. So there's that. Working with town of Quispamsis in particular has been really great. They're a community that is very much committed and very much engaged on the subject of climate change. So they have a climate change committee established. Not every community has one of these, but it's worthwhile looking at having a committee that brings together various staff and, if necessary, various community stakeholders on a quarterly basis to measure progress, to help coordinate action, to help report the progress that's being made. Other lessons learned would include that they've taken full advantage of the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund, as well as the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Green Municipal Fund when necessary to advance specific initiatives. In the last 5 years, we have worked with them specifically in updating their community energy plan and their targets, as well as creating an implementation strategy, which another lessons learned here is that although you can create a plan, it's not going to succeed unless you have a governance structure and a strategy for implementing that plan, that it doesn't just sit on the corner of somebody's desk, which is often the case because of the lack of capacity. And so we work with community to make sure that that strategy is put in place, like with the town of Quispamsis. We've also undertaken work to look at the economic impact potential of the plan, land-based renewable energy mapping assessment work. So the work continues. But the primary thing to note is that this is not a one-time thing. You need continued engagement. You need continued support. You need multi-year funding. You need to work in partnership with other key stakeholders in the province, such as the municipal associations, in achieving some of that ground.
Okay, and Mr. Oldfield, to date, are there any kind of specific or measurable technologies or adaptations that have been accomplished to date in that town? Anything you can point your finger at that this is a firm success you can point to?
Well, that's a kind of a big question, because I don't have their plan in front of me, nor their most up-to-date report. So I can't actually tell you, but I know that they've made significant progress in the efficiency of municipal buildings, and their civic center is actually a demonstration project as well as what can be done to get to net zero for these kinds of civic centers. They've introduced, I think it's 12 electric vehicle chargers in their region. They are converting part of their municipal fleet to electric vehicles. They do regular public education and promotion on energy efficiency, and they're looking at how to improve active transportation. These are ongoing, of course. They've made commitments to address climate change. They've engaged youth and local stakeholders. So lots of examples of small successes along the way. They are, I think, looking at a solar farm. Again, a lot of that is dependent upon the proper enabling environment and from a policy perspective.
Okay, and are they kind of taking the lead, bringing their planning and knowledge to other communities as well? And are other communities embracing this at this time?
Absolutely. They are part of our municipal working groups, which is an opportunity monthly to exchange knowledge and best practices. So they do take part in that very regularly. They've been to the regional and national conferences that we conduct, or that FCM conducts. We've published a case study on them, a recent article on them. So we do try to raise the profile. We've had workshops with the Greater St. John region, which includes Quispamsis, Rothsay, St. John, and of course Grand Bay Westfield, engaging all of those together to look at what are some of the regional opportunities. So yes, I can say that all the communities in at least that region and elsewhere in New Brunswick are very much committed to the same pathway. It's just that Quispamsis is a little further along from their planning side.
Excellent. Well, thanks for those answers, Mr. Oldfield. And clearly there's a lot of work to do that can be perhaps taken on with the local government reform and assisting municipalities in these efforts. So once again, thank you very much for coming in today and answering these questions. At this time, Mr. Chair, if there's questions from any other members, please feel free.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Perfect. Any other members of the government have questions? Okay, I'm not seeing any. Mr. Oldfield, thank you very much for your presentation. I'll give you an opportunity to make some closing comments if you wish.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I know you've had a lot of presentations and a few more to go. We look forward to see the results of this process. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.